Hi, I'm Nioret. Thanks for clicking on the video. You probably haven't seen my content before, so thanks for your time. I won't take too much of it. So I'm a professional dungeon master. Been doing this for close to 5 years, and you may be asking, like, what is a professional dungeon master? What does that mean? What is that? What is the definition behind that? And the generally accepted definition is a professional dungeon master is someone who is running paid games where every player at the table is paying a fee for that particular session or that particular campaign. But essentially, the assumption is, or the unwritten rule is, that these players are paying a fee for the understanding that they are getting a greater than usual level of dungeon mastering, of DMing. So that's essentially what a professional dungeon master means. Now, I'm approaching this movie viewing experience from that angle. So now you know that angle of someone who's not only a dungeon master, but is sort of doing this for a living. This is a part-time job of mine. So I'm going to approach this movie as a dungeon master, as a fan of D&D, and as a fan of movies in general. And I just put a fourth finger up for no reason. I like counting in fours. So first, we're going to talk about what I liked, what I didn't like, general miscellaneous sort of things, and finally, my general thoughts about the entire movie. So going into it, I was watching the trailers, and the trailers kind of, I think, played it down and dumbed it down to just make it seem like a really generic popcorn flick, Fast and the Furious if it was in the medieval world sort of movie. So I didn't have super high expectations. I thought this movie was going to be a flash in the pan, and it totally could still be, but I thought review-wise, it wasn't going to be anything spectacular. And then the reviews started coming in, and they were pretty good. And then there was more and more that were saying, hey, this movie isn't too bad. And the day I went to see the movie, the Rotten Tomatoes was at 90% for both the audience score and the review score, which is like pretty surprising, especially for what would seem to be like a clear franchise play. Like, obviously they don't intend to make just one of these and just call it a day. They are making this movie because they want more people to play. The assumption is that they want to get that brand name out there. They want people to really go into in the TTRPG aspect. They want to get some conversions going, because if people just go and watch the movie and that's all they do with the Dungeons and Dragons IP, I think Hasbro or Wizards of the Coast would consider that a sort of semi-failure. Sure, they got their ticket money, but they didn't convert them to actually trying the game out and sitting at a table. So I'm also approaching it from that angle. Are people going to like this movie? Are they going to learn about Dungeons and Dragons? Are they going to care about it? Or is this just going to be a medieval movie that is good or bad, but it just has the D&D name in name only, and there's no real aspect of it? I'm happy to say it does not feel like a generic fantasy movie, to a fault. It definitely has that D&D feel. So I think the movie has a really strong start. It definitely does not overwhelm you with the details of D&D. There's no lore dump. There's a very natural flow to things, and it really gets you invested in the characters quickly, which is great. I think as a whole, this movie really rules and kind of embraces that popcorn flick feel. Not every movie needs to be the Inception or the next Scorsese film. So this is definitely knows what it is, and it embraces it, and it does it well, I think. As far as it goes into the Dungeons and Dragons aspect, there are obviously all the characters are modeled after classes. There are plenty of cities that are from the Forgotten Realms that are named. There's a Critical Role call out, which it was if you know the series and you know the characters from Critical Role, you're going to recognize a little Easter egg they put in, which I think was pretty cool, but a nice touch. So what I liked is great cast of characters, great story. It was surprisingly emotional at some times, but it had the feeling of a real actual campaign where there's an emotional tempo of serious and then funny to lighten things up. So you have your good balance of a serious tone where the characters get into their backstories and why they're adventuring and why they're doing what they're doing, but then it breaks it up with more lighter moments of people joking around, and it's played well and it's written well. It doesn't feel like they're doing a D&D version of a Marvel movie. It doesn't feel like that. I was hoping it wouldn't be that. It feels like its own thing. It feels like its own flavor of the serious but witty PG-13 action movie. There's a lot of original ideas in here. You'll see, I think a common theme I saw in this movie which I really liked, was they found this balance of playing into the classic archetypes, such as the wise wizard, or the wanderlust druid, or the courageous fighter, and the angry barbarian. And they also kind of made new ground with it. The characters felt three-dimensional and not just one-note beings there written to progress the story or say their lines. They brought their own flavor, not just the main characters, but even the encounters and the plot hooks and the environments. It really was a great way to mix the old and the new. So even as an established like D&D fan who like read the monster manual front to back, I was surprised how they handled things. It was really refreshing. And I think lastly, the story isn't predictable. I didn't really know where it was going. There's some movies where you kind of know, okay, it starts here, it's gonna have this thing, and then they're gonna end this, and everyone's gonna be happy. I never really knew where it was going, which I personally enjoyed, and it always threw me for a loop in a good way. And there were some decisions that were kind of, when you think about it, it's like, hey, that doesn't make super amount of sense. But overall, it was a really good plot line. It was mostly touching at some moments. So this wasn't like a phoned in IP, quickly or grafted up storyline. I think they took their time with this and they really wanted this to be a hit. And you can tell that there's love in this movie from the production, that they really loved the D&D world and characters and lore. This was written by people who knew what the IP was, which is great. So now it's time to talk about the stuff that wasn't so great. And I'm trying not to be nitpicky. I'm not trying to rules lawyer the D&D movie, because I don't think that's any fun. Of course, the number one rule is the rule of cool, right? So I'm not gonna try to be that guy, but there were just some things that I couldn't ignore that I just had to like point out as to like, okay, the movie's good, but it could have been better if it took these things into account. First off, I think the major thing that this movie just didn't address at all is that in D&D, there's spell slots, right? There's a way to limit your magic use, so you can't just crank out spells nonstop. Imagine a level 1 magic user with no spell slots. Well, in the movie, there's just no limitation of magic, essentially. I don't expect them to exactly spell out, oh, I have this many slots left. But at no point where they're like, oh, I'm low on energy or something like that. They were just throwing spells left and right. And it seemed honestly unlimited. Like they could have done it as much as they wanted to. So that's one thing I think could have been like maybe a little piece of dialogue to explain why these characters who are magic casters can just throw away magic left and right. Because you don't really get a sense power scaling. You know that one person is said to be powerful and one person is said to be weak, but then in the movie, it kind of feels like they're playing their power scaling by ear. In one scene, this guy will not be so great. In the other scene, they'll just boom, do this like level 3 spell. Now I know D&D Beyond actually made stat blocks for the main cast, but I just can't be so sure that they're canon. For reference, that according to the stat blocks, all the characters in the movie, except for a select few, are level 5. So that's like the way I went into this. So another point about magic, again, I have a lot to say about the magic used in this movie. It was well done. The effects looked real, and they matched close enough to how I would imagine them to look. I think they did a good job of that. But another thing I wanted to talk about is that, so there's a druid in the movie, right? And druids have wild shape, but it'd be pretty crazy if you could just use wild shape as much as you wanted. You can wild shape in a limited amount of times at level 20. So I don't think this druid is level 20. I'm just gonna say that right there. But let's just say there's a lot of wild shaping. This movie, I don't know if it's intentional or not. It makes for a good plot, but there's a lot of exploiting. There's a lot of things that if this was done at the table, I could see DMs being like, hey, you shouldn't be able to do that. Or like there's definitely a lot of huge bending of the rules to the point where it felt like some of these things that they did in the movie were like RPG horror stories put into the big screen. Like, for example, there's that guy. There's a character in the movie who is constantly hitting on things. It's the horny bard, but it's not the bard, surprisingly. But I'll let you find out who it is on your own. So for me, it was like, okay, this is kind of out of place, and it didn't feel natural either. When this character flirted or hit on something, it would just come out of nowhere and it didn't feel organic to me. So I don't know if it was an intentional tongue-in-cheek reference, which is kind of like another factor to consider, because there are so many Easter eggs in this movie that it's kind of like you don't know how meta they're trying to be. Is this an intentional making fun of the player archetype of the guy who hits on everything? Is this intentionally making fun of the player archetype of the person who uses that feature in a way that probably wouldn't be allowed, but the DM might roll with it because they're getting steamrolled? Like, you don't know how meta it's trying to be. But I also recognize that these things are pretty cool to watch in movie form, even though they shouldn't probably be allowed at your table. So I think this might create a false expectation of people who see the movie and they go to play Dungeons and Dragons, the actual game, and they'd be like, I'm gonna do this thing. I saw it in the movie, and the DM's like, no, that's way too strong, and that's not how that works. So I think there will be a little bit of like a learning curve in that sense. Well, the main character in the movie, again, I don't want to reference the stat block too much, but it says that their class is a bard, and I believe it because the character walks around with a lute and sings song and is charismatic and is inspiring. And bards are half-casters, but apparently this guy isn't. I don't think it's a spoiler to say that this character does not use magic the entire movie. I guess that's their take on bards, is that they're sort of just musicians. They don't really use the magical melodies to incite their foes with different evocations and incantations. There's no magical aspect to the bard class in this movie that we saw so far. Maybe in the sequels, but this particular guy, no magic. But I feel like it would have been interesting if the bard had spells. I would love to have seen Vicious Mockery played out on the big screen, maybe in the sequel. And this is sort of more nitpicky towards the end, but the monsters, some of them were accurate, but a few of them were like, hey, that's not how that works. Actually, this creature should only be able to, like, there was some of that going on, but I get that it served the greater purpose of the movie. Like, I get that. So there is some sort of like, there is some level of them playing it fast and loose with how monsters work. It worked for the movie and it was cool. Wait, one more thing. I get that CGIing and makeup is a pain in the butt, but we really had a lack of like non-human looking races. I don't want to say what isn't there, but if you look at the cast, like, they're all just kind of humans. Like, it's just the elf, the pointy ear human. There's a tiefling who is a tiefling, which is just a human with horns. They don't have different skin. It's just a pale girl with horns. There's two other humans, and there's halflings, which is just, I don't like how the halflings look in this movie. All of them seemed like they're in front of a green screen. They just took a human, and in Photoshop they just scaled it down to be smaller. That's what halflings are. But I feel like there was more opportunity to see just non-traditional human races. D&D has so many cool races, and I get it. I get that it's a pain in the butt to constantly do makeup and CGI. But I think it would have been worthwhile to show people how many flavors of existence there are. But that's more of a me thing. Now, going into the good stuff, there's a lot of good stuff. As I said, the characters are great. The plot hooks are great. Every character has their own thing going on, and it feels good. It feels not cliche, and it feels real. It's an actual turmoil that they have going on within themselves. And I enjoyed that. Every character is three-dimensional, except for like one character who I think could have been written better, and he's one of the villains. He just seemed like, I thought there was going to be a point where they kind of explain why he acts the way he's acting, but they don't. He just seems like a very Saturday morning villain. But even as a Saturday morning villain, he does a great job. He's likable, so he's great. All the set pieces are beautiful. The shots are beautiful. The cinematography is beautiful. The humor, oh man, the humor is like the highlight of the movie. None of it feels forced or overly quippy or overly clever. Sometimes it's just banter, and they find a way to like insert it into the right places. The combat was really well done. I love the choreography. I don't consider myself like an action aficionado sort of thing, but it felt believable and it felt flashy enough to not be unrealistic, which is funny to say in a D&D movie. It felt like the punches and the actions they were doing had weight to them. It was just really well done choreo, so shout out to those guys. And the actual monster encounters were also fantastic. I definitely, there's one encounter in the movie, which is its own set piece, which is, I think, the action highlight of a totally different way to interpret a common monster that I've never seen done before. and it was so well done to the point that I want to do it in my D&D games. You'll know what I'm talking about if it's like an encounter that is over 5 minutes long and there's fire involved. There's fire involved. So yeah, that was really cool, and that's kind of like sets the tone for the rest of the movie. I think if I could describe this movie in like a short motto, it'd be familiar but different. So it's just different enough, but it's familiar enough. So I really like that. I mean, overall, in what it was trying to be, which is like a popcorn flick, I honestly think this is like a 10 out of 10 popcorn flick. Specifically a popcorn flick. This is not going to win any Oscars. It's not going to leave you riding back home thinking about the meaning of life, or doing a film essay on the movie. Maybe just a video review. But it's a really good time, and it doesn't fall apart at the seams while you're watching it, and it doesn't fall apart at the seams after you think about it a little bit. It's really good at what it intends to be, and it hits emotional highs and lows, and it makes you laugh, it makes you get pumped, it does all the right things. I think it frames D&D in a light where it seems exciting and fast-paced and multifaceted and living and fast and fun, which is great, because I know the when people think of D&D, they think of a bunch of nerds at a table going, I attack with my +2 longsword. Oh, it misses. All right, then that's my turn. It definitely it makes D&D cool. Let's just say that, which D&D was already cool, but now people know it's cool. I like some of the things they changed about how things work. Some of them worked really well. I like how they incorporated magic items. I like how they made spells look, maybe not how they were used so often, and the action was good. And all the D&D centric stuff that was clearly like, this is a monster, this is a magic item, this is a spell, all that stuff is translated onto the screen in a really great, non-awkward way. It feels organic through and through from beginning to end, which is really the hardest task. And it does that without info dumping them or lore dumping, which I thought was so well done. I really enjoyed that. There was no part with it where the characters had to stop and be like, oh, you didn't know about spell slots or class features? I'm a bard, by the way. Like, they never stopped to like explain to you. The movie just went on, and it felt organic because it relied on existing medieval tropes, and it sprinkled in information along the way, which is really a neat way to do it. And it didn't feel like 2.5 hours. It felt like a really good watch. I definitely could have used more of it. I would have enjoyed watching more of it. So as a wrap up, very good movie, very good representation of D&D. And I think when people come to the table, if people come to the table to try this D&D thing out that they watched the movie about, I think DMs are going to have to set expectations about how it translates to the real game. Because first of all, combat is not that fast, and there's a lot more reading involved and rules. So I think if you have players who come in because they saw the movie, play a little loose. Of course, there's going to be some rules explaining going on, some teaching going on, but I would say instead of dumping it all at once, kind of sprinkle it all along the way, like the movie. That's my recommendation. And I could make a whole video about how to introduce players to D&D, which I might do if people want that. But yeah, this movie is going to, it's up in the air to see if people are actually going to play D&D because of it. But that's definitely the goal here. So I'm assuming that they will, because that's what Hasbro wants, right? So yeah, that's it. That's my thoughts on the D&D movie. I think it did a great job. So I liked it. I think people are going to play D&D because of it, which is going to lead to a new problem because there's a shortage of DMs. And people are going to walk in thinking, oh man, I can't wait to play this fast-paced combat, totally witty and a constant balls to the wall, high-octane action game. So that's going to be a learning curve as well. I think we're going to, you know how people talk about the Matt Mercer effect or the Critical Role effect? I think we're going to have our D&D movie effect coming in. So that's my 2 takes. But yeah, good movie. Check it out. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, new channel, so every subscriber counts. But yeah, I'm Nioret. This is Nioret's D&D. See you next time with more D&D content.